Hello and welcome to session number 50, the FSA feedback system. My name is Matt Sessa. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Federal Student Aid. With me today is Nicholas Owen, who is the project manager for the FSA feedback system, and Joyce DeMoss, who is the student loan ombudsman at FSA. I also served as the executive sponsor for the rollout of the FSA feedback system. So just a few ground rules in terms of how we're going to handle this today. We have some prepared material, obviously, we want to go over, and then we'll have more than enough time to take questions at the end. As you can see, there's a microphone in the center aisle at the front of the room. If you have a question, just proceed to the microphone, and if you could, just announce your name and where you're from, and then the question you have, and we will do our best to answer that question. And then because there's probably more than one person that will have a question, if you could try to keep your question limited to one at a time, that would be great. Okay, let's get started. So this is what we'd like to cover today. I'm going to touch on the background section. In the background section, we're going to talk about the impetus for the FSA feedback system, so where it came from and why we're doing it. I'm also going to spend a little bit of time talking about the way that we rolled out the implementation of the system. We tried to take a very deliberate approach on how we were rolling out the system so that it met our objectives, which I'll cover as well. Nicholas is then going to go through the portal screens, and so what a user of the feedback system would see when they're entering feedback. Joyce is then going to come up and talk about the back-end features of the system, how feedback is routed through the organization or potentially to contractors of FSA, and how those questions are answered. And then I'm going to come back at the end and talk about some very high-level findings that we have since we launched the feedback system. And then I'll also cover some things that we know we have in our plans to do in the very near future in terms of enhancing the system. So the background, where did the FSA feedback system come from? There was a presidential memorandum in February of 2015 that also introduced the Student Aid Bill of Rights. In that presidential memorandum, it called out the creation of a feedback system that would contain complaints as well that would be handled and implemented by Federal Student Aid. So the impetus behind the system came from that presidential memorandum. There are very specific things we're attempting to achieve in developing the system. The first was to make it as simple as possible for students, borrowers, and families to get us feedback across the entire life cycle of student aid. So one simple to use place that people could offer feedback to us. The second was that we wanted to streamline the process in which we responded to those individual pieces of feedback. So the second major objective was to make sure we created a system in which folks that offered us feedback could get timely, meaningful resolutions to their concerns or issues. And then these last two bullets really go hand in hand. Probably maybe the most important thing we're trying to do with the system is to evaluate the data and the trends that we're collecting inside the system to identify potential areas for service delivery improvements. It's obviously very important that we address individual concerns, but it's much more powerful if we're able to use that data to identify issues and take care of them before other folks have similar experiences. So that's what we were attempting to do, and this is sort of the way we went about ensuring we met those objectives. So the first thing is development and the processes we went through in development. We started development in October of 2015, and we started to include various stakeholders as early as we possibly could. So the first point of interaction would be in what we would call usability testing and visual design. So we actually pulled some folks, some students from the University of Maryland, and also worked with some borrowers who were in repayment to sit down before we rolled out the system to look at the interface we were developing before it was launched. And we watched those users interact with those prototypes of the system to see if they could easily navigate to where they needed to go to correctly enter their areas of concern or feedback. And then based on those interactions, we were able to make adjustments and improve the interface that users ultimately used in the feedback system. And we were also able to do that at various points of the life cycle that we'll talk about. Also in this section, we implemented what we call the partner portal. So based on the types of feedback we receive, folks that are answering those questions or concerns could be folks with inside of federal student aid, or they could go to one of our contracted partners. So the servicers, for example, if we'll say complaint is related to something in servicing, the way that we develop the system, it will automatically route that to the end servicer, and they will use this partner portal to be able to respond to the borrower's concern right within the feedback system. The other thing that we did is we took advantage of our ability to offer Q&As and self-service, and Nicholas and Joyce will talk a little bit more about that when they go through the screens. But the way that, if folks have seen the system, on the right-hand side, there's always frequently asked questions that folks can use to potentially self-serve their issues. And what's interesting about the system is as they start to enter data and categorize their feedback, the questions dynamically change. The questions and answers dynamically change based on the information that they're entering. So the likelihood that that information is useful to them increases. So that's sort of what we went through at a very high level in the development stage. But then what we did is what we called phase one or a field test. We were required by the presidential memorandum to launch the system by July 1st of 2015. What we did, though, is we went pseudo-live in April. So what I mean by that is that we had a set of fully usable functionality that we rolled out in April, but we didn't publish the website address. And we interacted with a few advocacy groups and consumer constituents that we gave them the blind address, if you will, that they could use with their folks, their students and borrowers that they were trying to assist, so that we could do a full test of the system prior to the large launch that we were anticipating. And we also learned new things, because you can test as much as you want, but nothing sort of takes the place of live interactions. You never know what you're going to you can't anticipate everything that's going to happen. So by doing this soft launch or field test, we were able to learn even more and make more adjustments to the interface itself, but also in our back-end processes in how we were handling that feedback, which was very valuable because we were able to take our time and make those adjustments before the volume was significant, and it would cause delays. So we were very pleased that we took that approach, and so from April to June, we went through that field test and sort of calibrated our business processes and made interface adjustments where necessary. And then finally, we went through the big launch July 1st of 2016, and we introduced new functionality with this live launch. We incorporated live chat, which basically is technical support for those folks that are using the feedback system. So if you're on the feedback system and you're hung up, you don't understand how to categorize an issue or a complaint, or you don't necessarily know where to go, you can use that chat feature to get real-time help with somebody on the other end of that chat. The other thing we introduced in July was phone support or customer service support. In the customer service support for feedback, you can actually use that customer service group to log your issue, complaint, or whatever piece of feedback you have. So if for whatever reason, if you don't have access to be able to get to the portal, you can use the phone number, and they will take your issue or feedback over the phone and enter it into the system, and it would be worked just as if you would have entered it yourself. The other thing we did is continue to refine, and we will always continue to refine the knowledge base that I talked about that appears to the customers sort of in the right-hand navigation as they're entering information, but also the knowledge base our folks use to help research issues and respond to our customers. The other thing we added in this large launch was the ability for the users themselves to be able to rate their satisfaction with the resolution that was ultimately provided. So if a user came to the site or comes to the site and has a complaint, we obviously work that to ground and provide a resolution to their complaint. If the person, we'll talk about this, use their FSA ID to log the complaint, they'll get a follow-up email that asks them to give us their level of satisfaction with the resolution, and that's on a 1 to 5 scale. That helps us to determine, how well we're addressing folks' issues. But we're also not naive enough to realize, or we do realize that folks won't always be satisfied even when there's a correct resolution. For example, if I felt like there was a delay in my disbursement and I was anticipating that my entire loan would be written off, that's not a viable resolution. So if we explained why there was a delay and they weren't satisfied with that, well then, we understand that we can use that data as an information point, but it's not an absolute. Then the other thing we did in this portion of the rollout was introduce data into our enterprise data warehouse. We talked about the importance of analytics. We can get certain trends and understanding with the data resident within the complaint system, but we were able to drive much deeper when we connect that data to our enterprise data warehouse. So who can submit feedback? I'll just read this. A student, parent, borrower, third-party representative, or endorser of a student's federal financial aid can submit feedback about their own experience or on behalf of someone else. So that if you have a student in your office and you want to be able to help them log feedback, or you want to log feedback on their behalf, you have the capability to do that. Similarly, consumer advocacy groups have the ability to be able to offer feedback on another's behalf. And that could also occur for a parent of a student or a relationship like that. So we accept 3 types of feedback in the system. So I know we talk a lot about complaints, and as we'll see later, complaints are the most prevalent type of feedback that we get. But what we consider to be a complaint is any customer dissatisfaction with the federal financial aid experience associated with a Title IV policy, process, or service, or entity where an explanation or a resolution is expected. That's how we define a complaint. But at the end of the day, whatever a person perceives to be a complaint and enters into that system, we treat as a complaint. Now, it can be resolved a multitude of different ways, and we'll talk about that later as well. The other type of feedback that we will accept is an allegation of suspicious activity. So this is information reported about an entity or an individual that a customer believes violated a federal law related to federal student aid. And it's important to stress that this is an allegation of suspicious activity. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in the last section, where we can see users are believing something's a suspicious activity when in fact it's probably just another complaint. And then lastly, we also accept positive feedback. So this is, as you would expect, not the most popular chosen piece of feedback, but nonetheless, we are getting some. And that positive feedback could be related to their school or institution of higher education. It could be related to an FSA program. We also have received some positive feedback about servicers and others. So we are getting positive feedback. So how to submit feedback? We talked about you can do it through the online portal or through the phone with a live agent. But there's also 3 different ways to submit a complaint. And the first and the best way to submit a piece of feedback through the feedback system is by using your FSA ID. If you use the FSA ID, and Nick and Joyce will touch on this as well, it's a better experience for the borrowers. You're able to track the progress of your case. We're able to email you and capture your satisfaction level. There's just more things you can do when you log your piece of feedback with an FSA ID. But we didn't want to require an FSA ID because, remember, one of the primary objectives of the system was to make it easy for somebody to provide us with feedback. So if somebody doesn't have an FSA ID, they can't remember it, or they don't want to create one, they can still give us feedback and then associate certain pieces of information that we can use to identify the account to help figure out the resolution and provide that to the customer. So there is a secondary way that they can provide feedback without creating an FSA ID. And lastly, even if they're uncomfortable in doing that and they want to give us feedback anonymously, we'll also accept that. So people are coming to the feedback system today and logging feedback anonymously. We'll accept that, but we can't offer those folks a resolution, obviously, because we don't know who they are. We can't connect it to a specific account. But what we do is we capture that, and then we can use that in the trend analysis that we've talked about. So coordination with other entities. So this month, all of the complaints that we collect in the FSA feedback system are being transferred to or transmitted to the Federal Trade Commission system, the Consumer Sentinel database. And basically, this is the CFPB, the Department of Defense, Veteran Affairs, all of those folks that also capture complaints report into this Consumer Sentinel. So by doing that, it reduces the burden on an individual complainant because all of that data is captured there, and different agencies can see the data that's collected there. So we started to do that actually within the last week. So all the information that we collect, aside from positive feedback, is being transmitted to the Consumer Sentinel as we speak. So with that kind of gives you a background of where the system came from, the processes we used to develop, and sort of high level the portions of the system. Now Nicholas is going to go into a little bit more detail about the individual screens found within the portal.
Thank you. How's everyone doing today? My name is Nicholas Stone, and I serve as the project manager for the feedback system. And we have some really, really good folks that work really, really hard to make sure that you, the customers, have a really, really good user experience. So in this section on the screen, I want to talk you through the actual portal of the feedback system. So the main access point to the feedback system is through studentaid.gov/feedback. And our intention is to provide a seamless and consistent customer experience within the feedback system that has replicated the styling and branding of studentaid.gov. On the screen, as you can see, I know it's a little hard to understand, but you'll see that there's a complaint section, also the allegations of suspicious activity that Matt alluded to, and also positive feedback. And we always love positive feedback, so if you have any right now, you can submit it, okay? We want to make sure that it is easy as possible to submit any type of feedback. So if you're feeling really excited right now, you could actually pull out your cell phone and actually get the same user experience on your phone because it's mobile enabled, all right? Also, to be consistent with studentaid.gov, it's also available in English and Spanish. Even after our July release, we are actively making improvements to the system. I want to highlight this section with the new user design feature, what to expect. So based on our regular meetings with advocacy groups, we made updates to the homepage in late October to provide more information to users about what to expect. So now, even before submitting complaints, users will be better informed about our goal to provide an initial response within 15 days of submission, a resolution within 60 days, and the expectation that they will receive a case number to reference when communicating with ED representatives. So on the next slide, I want to highlight providing feedback, the portal, and logging in with the FSA ID, the username and password. And by far, they have the most robust experience with the feedback system because they can easily track the status of their case online and securely transmit additional information. And of course, people have the option of submitting feedback without their FSA ID and, of course, anonymously. And I was speaking to Janet over there, one of our good folks that work really, really hard. One person actually submitted feedback anonymously, but in the description, they put their contact information. So we are going to submit that as, you know, they submitted their contact information because they provided it, okay? Well, that's one instance that we just wanted to highlight that happened just right now, all right? So when submitting feedback, customers are required to describe their issue and then categorize their submission by answering a series of questions. That categorization is used to direct the submission to the appropriate FSA business unit and/or contractor to follow up. And what's also neat about the system is that we allow for customers to have the option to state their desired resolution. And sometimes that categorization, you know, they might not provide all the information that we need, but once they provide that additional information to us, it can better categorize to the appropriate business unit or contractor. I want to highlight the quick links to common questions and also additional resources section that Matt spoke about. The idea here is that for the people coming to our page for general information, let's educate them and point them to the right direction on studentaid.gov so we're not inundated with many complaints that really aren't complaints. So in this section, you'll see, you know, we're educating customers on how to reset their FSA ID, information regarding school closures, take for example ITT, and also what type of information will be shared when they submit their complaint. General questions. Slide 19, you guys can submit complaints on behalf of students as well. And we just want to highlight that, and here's the section right here. If they're unable to do it themselves, or if you have information that they might not have. And also, last but not least, military information requested. We ask customers to indicate if they are a member of the military in order to ensure their continued support for the Principles of Excellence executive order that was signed in April 2012. I just want to make sure that we support our service members and, you know, be in regulatory requirements as well too, okay? So I will have Joyce come up and she will talk about the features of the system. Thank you.
Good afternoon. As Matt introduced, I'm the FSA Ombudsman, and my team is responsible for coordinating and monitoring the back-end functionalities and activities that are supporting the system. And I was here last year at the conference when this was still just maybe a bigger gleam in our eye, and that we had some examples. Now that the system is launched, I'm really glad to be back here and talk a bit more detail about the back end, and probably makes me a little bit of a geek, but that's the part that really makes this system exciting to me, and that some of those back-end functionalities that it was able to bring on board to try to speed the resolution of the complaints and the feedback that's being submitted to us. So once the person has input all of their contact information and told us who they are and how to get a hold of them, and they then are moving to what we're calling the What Happened page. And the What Happened page is really where we're capturing that information that drives where the feedback is going to go once they press that submit button. So it's either to one of the FSA business units like program compliance, or to one of our vendors that's supporting the feedback resolution. And the first notation you'll see is that indication of that interactive progress bar that shows the submitter exactly where they are in the process, so they have an idea of what's happening. And this has been an ongoing learning process as we've gone through the methodical approach that Matt described, in that we had the usability testing, we had the field test, and one of the early things we learned in all of those efforts was people just want to tell us what the problem was, and they want to be able to tell us in their own words, and really not have to go through, and this is their, probably their perspective, the drudgery of trying to categorize it, but really just get it all out as far as what happened. So we have the what happened question is right at the top. It's a narrative text box. They get to go into whatever detail they want to tell us all about the situation that happened to them. The second text box that's on that page that is really valuable to us is the desired outcome. One of the important aspects of complaint resolution is in particular for complainants, is to describe for us what is their expectation about how this thing ought to be resolved. And we have found that to be helpful once the action has been submitted, because they can categorize it, but sometimes they'll say something in that what happened and in the desired outcomes section that says, "Ooh, no, it should go over here." So we're really glad that we're capturing that text information. At the bottom half of the page is where the submitter then is able to put in the categories. And it's a bit of a beehive that's going on behind the scenes in terms of the categorization. I was thinking I should have brought along the taxonomy. If number of colors and font size is indication of complexity, this is probably about medium, because it's got about 5 colors and about 8-point type. When the person says, "I'm in the repaying aid part of the life cycle," and then it's okay, well, then what happened? And so they are walked through each of those questions to tell us and to give us a clue as to where that submission ought to go once they hit that submit button. So that's a series of drop-down menus that they're walking through there in the lower part of the screen. Okay. Allegations of suspicious activity. And we designed the feedback system so that people can submit and report what they believe or perceive to be fraud, waste, and abuse. And I want to impress, and because I just walked out of the OIG session on how to deter and detect fraud, this is not a replacement for the OIG. As you'll hear in that session, we do have FSA does have a close working relationship about fraud, reports of fraud and allegations of suspicious activity. So this is not a replacement for that. But it is a way for us to get that information, because of course we do want to protect the taxpayers' money. And so while we take all allegations of suspicious activity seriously, we recognize that opens the door for some things to come in that maybe aren't necessarily fraud. After we look at it, it really is a misunderstanding, or it's really a complaint. I didn't get my money fast enough, and that surely represents something wrong that's going on at the school. But that is, that's the risk that we take in terms of trying to open the door to collect those suspicious activity complaints. And we are, as a result, since implementation, we are looking at some additional changes to the portal to make sure that we are directing those allegations to the proper location, encouraging folks, if they want to report directly to the IG, this is how you do that. So that'll be coming up in a matter of months. And as Matt and Nick both alluded to, we do get positive feedback, and we have received some examples of positive feedback, and you'll see that a little bit later on in the presentation. We also have found that that is also a way for someone to tell us that it's a complaint, and not necessarily positive feedback. So the good news is, again, on the back end, as we look at those, as we look at them coming in the door, and we're looking at the submissions, we're able to identify these and get them routed to the proper locations so that they are properly treated and reviewed for resolution, even though it was submitted as positive feedback. We had, in the time that the system has been up and running, we had a customer that submitted a report of their satisfaction because they got help with their FAFSA. So it was a compliment to the call center. We had a piece of positive feedback. The person was expressing appreciation for the help from their servicer for being informative and helpful. And we had another person, and this was one of the early pieces of feedback that we got, positive feedback, person who wanted to be congratulated because they paid their loan back. So good for them. I gave them big kudos for that. Once the person has pushed the submit, or excuse me, before they press the submit button, they go into the review and submit phase. And you've probably seen this format before on other submission formats that you've used. And this simply presents the information back to the submitter so that they're able to confirm, did they get their name, did they spell their name right, give their phone number, email address. All of that information is correct before they actually hit the submit button. And once they hit the submit button, then of course it's committed to the system. And we talked earlier about using the FSA ID, and the benefits of using the FSA ID certainly is there are benefits to that for the submitter. And first is in the second paragraph on this particular screen. Of course, the case number is assigned. The submitter is told what the case number is, but then they're given the link to the My Cases button or the My Cases screen. And on that, they're able to, if they use their FSA ID, they're able to review the status of their cases. They're also able to submit documents to us if we're asking them for additional information, if they have an electronic version, PDF file, or something like that. They're able to upload that through the My Cases functionality and get that directly to us through a secure transmission method. So it's that much more secure. It's not flying around over email. You're not got PII that's flying through the email, nor is it going over the US mail. It's going directly into the system. So that's available through the My Cases button. The other part, and this is the feedback that we heard from the stakeholder and advocacy groups, is just constantly making sure the submitter understands what the timeline is. And that's always the question is, when am I going to hear back from somebody? So we tell them. And we make a commitment to get back to them at least within 15 days of their first submission. And that really is a confirmation point of, okay, we have your case, we have your submission, and it also is the opportunity for us to ask additional questions. If there's anything about their submission that is unclear, if we need to ask additional questions or need additional information, we use that we can do that at the 15-day time frame. And then, of course, we do our best to provide a resolution within 60 days. Now, the 60-day timeline we do recognize that some cases can take longer than 60 days. I think the best example of that would be some of our loan discharge requests. If there is additional documentation that is required, identity theft immediately pops to the top of the list as an item that there can be some back and forth between the submitter and the loan servicer in the collection of documentation. So some things can take longer than 60 days. Like we say, we try to do our best to get it resolved within 60 days. Right now, as of September 30, we were averaging case open time at about 36 days. So, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Matt.
Thank Thank you, Joyce. I want to cover our findings. So as we talked about, we had a field test that started in April, and then we have collected data from April in this particular set of slides through September 30th. But before I get there, I just wanted to mention two quick things. We talked about the routing quite a bit, so how somebody categorizes their complaint is very sensitive in terms of how the routing works. And so that sort of feeds it to an FSA business unit or contractor. But for those folks in the audience, are mostly institutions of higher education, those are routed to the program compliance folks. We tried to keep the back-end interaction between institutions of higher education and FSA really the same as it's always been. It's just the intake mechanism should be much more efficient and holistic for us. So complaints or any kind of feedback coming in related to an institution of higher education should flow through program compliance, and they will contact you if they need additional information or need information from the school to be able to provide a resolution to the issue. So I just wanted to make sure folks were aware of that. And then the other thing I wanted to point out in some of the slides that Joyce went through, in what we learned in some of the usability and field tests that we did in moving the box that allowed someone to tell us what happened as quickly as possible. We learned that's really what they wanted to do first. And if you remember those objectives we went over in the beginning, the most important thing for us in developing this system was to make it easy for people to give us feedback. And if they got frustrated early and went away, that was a missed opportunity for them to provide us feedback and for us to provide a meaningful resolution. But the other thing that's really important to us, for the reasons we just talked about, is how they categorize their complaints. So by learning and putting that opportunity up front to allow them to tell us what happened, get it off their chest, keeps them in the system, and then we present the hopefully simple categorization that gets it to the right place as quickly as possible to get started on the resolution, but also starts to feed into what we're going to talk about now and how we're able to analyze that data, which is also extremely important, because the better we can analyze those data and trends, the more we can drive service level improvements to stop other people from having potential issues. It also helps us with overall contractor oversight and some other things. So those are the reasons we took a very deliberate approach to rolling this out, because developing functional simplicity is really difficult. And I think the team, both within FSA and the contractor we used to develop the system, did a really great job with that. So on to the findings. First, I want to say we are in the process of preparing a preliminary report that we hopefully will put out before the end of the calendar year. In the presidential memorandum that we talked about, we are required to produce an annual report from the feedback system, but the first date that report is due is October 1st of 2017, and then every year thereafter. So we're in the vein that we just talked about and trying to iterate and learn a bit at a time. We're working on publishing a preliminary report that's not required, that hopefully we can learn from and perfect by the time the actual report is due in October of 17. But this is the highest level. We're going to go through some very high level data today, and this is feedback at the highest level. And remember, there's three types of feedback: complaints, positive feedback, and suspicious activity. So as you can see, April, when the field test began, through the end of September, we received a total of just over 4,811 pieces of feedback have come through the system. Probably not surprisingly, the largest type of feedback that we're receiving is in fact complaints. You can see about 76% of all feedback is categorized by the user as a complaint. After that, 21% of what we were receiving is allegations of suspicious activity. I keep stressing allegations. What we learned when we started to dig into the details, especially around allegations of suspicious activity, is the vast majority of the allegations of suspicious activity were really just different types of complaints. So we're evaluating that now. When we present the preliminary report, we want to make it clear that these are allegations of suspicious activity and put some context around what actually turned out to be allegations that we really needed to look into more deeply. And then finally, at 3% are our positive feedback. It's good for us to have this, though, so that we can, it's just as important to know what we're all doing right than it is to identify areas for improvement. So as you can see, we did receive about 3% of our feedback types are positive feedback. So this is sort of the next layer down. We're also looking at, let me just go back because I didn't do this last time. So this is the universe of feedback that we're receiving, the 3 different feedback types. Now what we're going to dive into specifically are the different, how complaints are categorized. So the next 2 sets of slides are really laying out or showing you how the 3,673 complaints are distributed. So just looking at complaints by life cycle, this is what we're seeing. The largest amount of complaints are coming in around applying or reapplying for aid. And in looking at some of the underlying data or subcategories, these are things related to the FAFSA, people who have questions or aren't having the best experience with the FAFSA, or it could be an FSA ID issue, or they don't understand something on the application. So it's those sorts of things that are driving the 41% of complaints related to applying or reapplying for aid. After that, the 37% of complaints are in that receiving aid portion of the life cycle. And what we're seeing here, this is mostly related to what people perceive to be delays in receiving their funds. So once everybody completes the FAFSA, they want their money, and then they want it, as quickly as possible to know that it was delivered. So a lot of these are perceived delays that are driving this 37% of complaints related to receiving aid. And then in the blue section, the 17% are related to repaying aid. So this is after folks have completed or separated with their institution. They're coming through their grace period, and now they're expected to repay. 17% of all the complaints we received thus far are related to repaying their aid. So what we've seen a little bit is these are related to, could be discharges, cancellations are in there, and then of course things regarding their repayment plans or payments are all things that are related to repaying aid. And then finally at 5%, or complaints that are folks that are in default, which folks have complaints, but in terms of the overall spectrum of our population, the folks that are in default are a much smaller population than the rest of students and borrowers. So now looking at complaints by category. So when a user comes in and they have a complaint that we talked about, we ask them to categorize their complaints. This is how these categorizations are breaking down. You can see the largest category is school, but that's not surprising when you think about it, because there's so much interaction between students and schools through that whole applying and receiving aid process, that's not surprising. And the other factor is there's 6,500 schools with branch campuses, 7,500 schools. So it's not surprising that the highest category of complaints are categorized as school. The other thing I wanted to talk about, we don't have it here, but we're working on in the preliminary report, is also breakdowns on how complaints are resolved. We understand, and what we see so far is the vast majority of complaints are resolved by what we call clarifying or educating the complainant about something. So we talked about they may be dissatisfied on how long it took them to receive their aid, but there was nothing that was done incorrectly or improper. So it's a matter of just explaining the process to the student or borrower so that they understand that, and that complaint is considered to be closed and resolved. So when we get to the actual publishing of the preliminary report, we'll show the percentages of complaints that were resolved by clarifying a process for the borrower as opposed to an action that was taken. So when an action was taken, that means something happened to correct an issue. So there was something that needed to be corrected, for that complainant or the student or borrower. And that's good for folks to see that, not every time someone has a complaint, it means that something was done wrong. There are certain cases where action was taken, which are things we want to know about and correct, and other times when things just need to be explained to the student or borrower. We also can resolve complaints by referring the issue to other organizations, which will also show in detail in the preliminary report that we hope to publish by the end of the calendar year. Some of the other complaint categories are, as you can see, application or eligibility. Folks, don't like to hear sometimes that they're not eligible for a certain grant and they want to be eligible for a certain type of grant, and so there are complaints related to that, and that's how they're categorizing their complaint. We talked about the federal aid receipt process, and also, again, in that 21%, the blue, are generally complaints related to something regarding their servicing and that federal aid repayment. We also capture a category, and Nicholas talked about it briefly, for military and veteran benefits. So we can see folks who are having specific issues related to that. You can see that there's been a very small number of those types of complaints through September 30th. I think there's 17, so it's less than 1%. So that's what we're seeing thus far. As I said in the preliminary report, we're going to take some time in that report to provide context, similar to what I just talked about in terms of action taken, process clarified, but also proper context where we're talking about a particular complaints with a particular contractor or with a potential sector, providing volumes along with that, so that if one particular entity has a high number of complaints, but we're also showing that they have the largest amount of volume, it provides proper context. Or the opposite, they have a high number of complaints and they don't service as much volume. We're providing all of that context within the report so that folks can make meaningful determinations. So things to look forward to. As I said, we continue to evaluate not only the interface of the system, but our business processes, and this will be something that's ongoing, hopefully, for as long as we have the system, us pinpointing areas for improvement. So we're going to talk a little bit about those. The first bullet, I know the last time we did, at the last conference, we did a session on complaint system, and someone may get up and ask a question, or I'd pass somebody in the hallway talking to someone else and say, well, I wonder, how can I complain about the complaint system? Well, now you can. Very soon, you'll be able to complain about the complaint system. So in this first bullet, we're going to offer, is this by December, right? Most of these are by December. We're going to allow folks to offer feedback about the complaint system itself or the customer service center supporting the complaint system. So if folks have issues with a customer service rep that they're trying to provide feedback to, or the system will be able to collect that. And that's a great data point for us to continue to refine the system. We're also going to add, a field so that we're able to pinpoint folks who are having issues with SCRA, or the Service Member Civil Relief Act, so that we can, matter-of-factly, with no assumptions, drive down to the number of folks that are having issues or perceived issues with SCRA benefits. We were able to do this today through keyword searches. Everything that's entered into the system, we have the ability to do keyword searches and bring back complaints that contain certain keywords. But in order to take any sort of, as I said, a subjectivity out of this, we're offering a new field that will allow the user to tell us that they have issues with SCRA. And then, as we talked about quite a bit, we're working on a preliminary report on the data that we collected, and we hope to have published by the end of the calendar year. So I'm sure folks will see when that comes out. We're excited about that. And then finally, we talked about we're working each October, starting in 2017, we'll issue a full annual report on the data that we collected in that year. And as we learn more, we'll probably continue to perfect those reports as well. So before we get into individual questions, I just kind of wanted to walk through the things we talked about and what we intended to hopefully share with folks today. So the first thing is the impetus behind the complaint system. It was driven out of a presidential memorandum that contained the Student Aid Bill of Rights. It's probably also important to note we collected complaints within FSA prior to the presidential memorandum. We just sort of did it in maybe a disparate way where each business unit had their own system or their own process to use to collect and resolve those complaints. With the enterprise complaint system born out of the presidential memorandum, we created a much simpler intake system and a holistic intake system that allows us to do the things that we talked about. Make it easy for somebody, one place for somebody to go, make it as easy as possible for them to submit feedback, and then have a way for us to holistically look at that data to drive service delivery improvements and help with our overall oversight of our contractors. So we wanted to make sure folks were aware of that. And we did that by taking a very deliberate and iterative approach to development. Because those objectives were to make it as simple as possible for someone to provide us with feedback, we took our time and did that in chunks and included as many users as we could in that development process and that field test to make sure that we got it right, or as right as possible, before we launched. And even after we launched, we continued to analyze areas for improvement. And so by publishing the preliminary report too, we hope to get feedback on that again so we can perfect it for the actual annual required report as well. And then beyond that, we can see in the data that we're collecting, we're going to continue to drive down into details so we can find those meaningful areas for improvement and then provide information to the overall general public on how folks are perceiving different points of federal student aid delivery. So with that, if anybody has any questions, feel free to come up to the microphone in the center aisle here at the front of the room, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. Hi.
Hi. First of all, I want to say thank you for putting this together so well, not just the presentation, but the actual feedback system. I had one question. For those who file anonymous complaints, are you tracking any information at all, like IP address, for example? Because what I wonder is, does one person repeatedly filing complaints about maybe the same issue, the same institution, then skew the information you have?
For anonymous complaints, we're trying to treat them as anonymous since we're advertising those as anonymous complaints. It's not something that we look at on a regular course, to look at IP addresses to see if they're coming from the same source. But your point is well taken for other types of complaints. We know we have folks that will submit complaints over and over and over again. And we've had quite a bit of discussion internally about that. We want to make sure we're not discounting any issues so that if they have multiple complaints or they have a complaint about the way their first complaint was resolved, we want to be sensitive to that. But we also know at some point we won't be able to do anything else, and this person is not going to be satisfied. So as Joyce mentioned, her role is as the ombudsman, the student loan ombudsman. So one of the back-end processes is if the business unit feels like they've done everything that they can for a particular complainant and they're still not satisfied and they still want to come back with additional complaints, that's escalated to the student loan ombudsman then to review the case and make sure it was properly handled so we can finally close that out and try to get that person to move along. Thank you. Yes.
Well, I went to the Ask a Fed, and I was told to submit my 2 questions through here, but it's not really a complaint. It's regarding something like families that put in $5 million in income earned from work and their AGI is $50,000. This doesn't really seem like a place for financial aid administrators to submit information like that, but that's what I was told to do.
I don't think so. I mean, maybe they were thinking under allegations of suspicious activity. You could log some.
No, I was pretty clear.
Okay.
It makes their EFC zero. If they
Right.
put like $5 million in income, but $50,000 in adjusted gross income,
Right.
the calculation drops their EFC to zero. When you fix their income earned from work, it jumps it up.
But I know there is a process, there's a hotline, I think, that the IG has where you can report what you believe is, you know,
It's not fraud.
Okay.
It was like they put in the cents. So my
Oh,
income is
okay.
$50,748.53. And the way the FAFSA works, when you enter that,
Okay.
it automatically then puts a decimal point and 2 zeros,
so
making it a $5 million income.
it was just a data entry mistake.
It's data entry issue, and my point is, they should be looking for that. But they told me to send it through here, and I just don't think that that's,
Well,
I just wanted
unless-
to verify that's probably not the right place.
Unless what they're thinking about is that there needs to be an improvement to that field, and folks are having, complaints about the way that field works and requiring the decimals, then that would be a valid complaint to enter into the system, and we would look into it.
So I could enter it as a third party? I mean, I have an FSA ID, but,
Yes, I would think that would be an appropriate, or if you have a particular student or borrower that you're working with, you could enter it on their behalf, and then we would
oh,
look
we
at
have
it.
12
Yeah.
on our
that-
campus that enter
That would be
that way.
appropriate, and then we would have it officially in the system, so we could track in our trends, and if other folks are having similar complaints, it's good for us to have it into the system, and then we can evaluate if that's a change that we could make, or let folks know a reason why we can't make that change within the complaint, and respond within the complaint system.
Okay.
Hello,
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
My question is, do you provide feedback to the schools? And I've not gotten any feedback, so that's a good sign. but
Right.
Do you provide feedback if you know who the school is?
Well, that's a good question, and it was one we got earlier as well. So I know that there was somebody from an institution in the last session who said that they had a case where they provided information to program compliance to go into the feedback system, and then they hadn't heard anything thereafter. And what we told them is basically no news is good news. So in a particular feedback case, if you provide information and you don't hear anything back, that generally means that the case the resolution was provided to the complainant and they didn't have any other information to reopen the case. Or if you haven't heard anything, it could very well be we haven't received a complaint for your school or any type of feedback for your school. So that would be my guess. We just haven't received anything as of yet. There was some interest in schools seeing the sort of a breakdown of the number of feedback types or complaints we received over a given time period. That's something we hadn't contemplated, but we said we would take back and see if that's something we would want to do, provide individual reports to schools. Any other questions?
Before you get to that, I mean, besides typing it into the address bar, is it on your homepage?
Yep.
You
That-
have to go-
Yeah, that's a good question. So you can get to the, so the question was, how do you get to the complaint system? Do you have to enter in the straight address or URL that Nicholas showed you? That's one way to get there, but you can also get there through studentaid.gov. So you can navigate there from the homepage, and it's also on the Contact Us page. So if you go and click on Contact Us, it contains the link to the feedback system. The other thing we talked about, and something that we're working on, we don't have a timeline on it yet, is making sure that the feedback system is included in all FSA sites in the navigation. So that is something we're looking at now. You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, if not, have a good rest of the day and a good conference. Thank you.